I'm a 32-year-old guy, and until very recently, I was married to Alma, who is 30. Today was supposed to be our 5th wedding anniversary. To anyone looking from the outside, we were the definition of couple goals. We both had lucrative corporate careers, owned a gorgeous custom-built home in a desirable neighborhood, and our Instagram feeds were a non-stop reel of weekend getaways, European vacations, and smiling wine-tasting photos. We were the couple our friends came to for relationship advice. But as I learned the hard way, social media is nothing but a curated lie. The truth is, the rot set in about 2 years ago. It started subtle. Alma, who used to be incredibly affectionate, suddenly became fiercely protective of her phone. She started putting it face down on every surface. If I walked into the room while she was typing, she'd abruptly lock the screen and look at me like I'd just broken into her house. Then came the business trips. Suddenly, her regional marketing job required her to spend 3 out of 4 weekends a month at corporate retreats or urgent client meetings. Whenever I tried to talk to her about the emotional distance, she'd completely flip the script. She'd look at me with this exhausting, condescending pity and tell me I was being deeply insecure. "I'm working hard for our future, and your jealousy is really suffocating," she'd say. For a long time, I actually believed her. I felt guilty for even doubting her. I thought I was the problem. Then, the universe handed me the truth on a silver platter. We have a shared iMac in our home office, and Alma had recently bought a new iPad that was linked to her iCloud. One evening, she was out on another one of her late-night client dinners. I went upstairs to print some tax documents, and the iPad on the desk started buzzing uncontrollably. I glanced over, and right there on the lock screen, a series of incredibly graphic, explicit messages popped up. They were from a contact saved simply as M. The texts left absolutely zero room for interpretation. They weren't just sleeping together, they were mocking me. One text from M read, "Is the clueless husband still buying the late-night work excuse?" Alma's reply was, "Every single time. He's so desperate to keep me, he'll believe anything." My blood turned to ice. I sat in that dark office for 3 hours, reading through months of synced messages. It was worse than a simple fling. I uncovered that Alma wasn't just cheating. She was actively consulting a lawyer on how to systematically drain our joint investment accounts, maximize her alimony, and blindside me with divorce papers right after our 5th anniversary, which, in our jurisdiction, changes how assets are split. She wanted to ruin me financially and leave me high and dry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw her clothes out the window. But I knew that if I reacted with pure emotion, she'd get tipped off and hide the money faster. So, I chose to play the long game. I spent the next 6 months playing the role of the oblivious, doting husband. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I hired a top-tier private investigator. I quietly opened a private bank account at an entirely different institution, legally separated our personal finances, and legally moved a substantial inheritance I had received from my late grandfather into a protected trust that she couldn't touch. I gathered an absolute mountain of ironclad evidence. When Alma suggested we celebrate our 5th anniversary at Le Petit Chateaux, the most exclusive, notoriously expensive Michelin star restaurant in the city, I smiled and agreed. She thought she was setting up the ultimate dramatic exit. I let her think she was in control. The night of the dinner arrived. The atmosphere at our table was incredibly tense, though I kept a polite smile plastered on my face. Alma looked beautiful, but her demeanor was cold and incredibly smug. She barely made eye contact with me, instead constantly looking down at her phone under the table, smiling at hidden texts. I ordered a very expensive bottle of champagne, pouring us both a glass. Right after the main course was served, Alma suddenly set her fork down. She took a deep, deliberate breath, slid her phone into her purse, and locked eyes with me. A chilling, triumphant smile spread across her face. She didn't hesitate. She dropped the bomb with absolute malice in her voice. "I'm just going to come out and say it," she said, leaning forward. "I've been cheating on you for 2 years with a real man. Someone who actually knows how to take care of me. I'm leaving you, and my lawyer is going to make sure I take half of everything you own. Happy anniversary." She sat back, crossing her arms, waiting for the fireworks. She expected me to burst into tears. She expected me to beg, to shout, or to make a scene. Instead, I just sat there. I didn't flinch. I didn't let a single tear well up. I calmly reached down, picked up my champagne glass, and looked her right in the eyes. I let out a warm, genuinely relaxed smile. I raised my glass toward her. To your new life, Alma, I said clearly, my voice completely steady. May you get exactly what you deserve. Alma's smug grin instantly faltered. The utter lack of emotion on my face completely threw her off script. She blinked rapidly, her mouth slightly opening, trying to process why I wasn't falling apart. She expected a broken man, but I was completely at peace. Before she could even utter a word to ask me why I was smiling, I shifted my gaze. I looked right past her shoulder toward the front entrance of the restaurant. Alma noticed my eyes shifting. She turned around to see what I was looking at, and the second she saw the person walking through the restaurant doors directly toward our table, the remaining color completely drained from her face. The woman walking toward our table looked like she had stepped straight off a Parisian runway. She was in her early 30s, wearing an incredibly sharp, tailored emerald suit, her heels clicking deliberately against the marble floor. She possessed the kind of quiet, effortless confidence that immediately commanded a room. As she drew closer, Alma's eyes went completely wide. Her jaw literally dropped, and I watched the color drain from her face so fast I thought she might actually faint right into her expensive steak. To understand why Alma looked like she had just seen a ghost, you have to know who this woman was. Her name was Sarah, and Sarah happened to be married to M. M wasn't some mysterious, underground billionaire. His name was Marcus, and he was Alma's regional vice president at her corporate marketing firm. He was her boss. For the past 2 years, Alma thought she was playing the ultimate high society game. Marcus had been feeding her a steady diet of lies, telling her that his wife was a nagging, bitter woman who was holding him back, and that he was just waiting for the perfect moment to leave her so he and Alma could be a power couple. Alma genuinely believed she was stealing a wealthy, affluent man away to start a life of luxury. What Alma didn't know was that Sarah and I had been quietly working together for the last 3 months. Sarah reached our table, offering me a warm, friendly nod. Without waiting for an invitation, she pulled up an empty chair from the adjacent table and slid it right next to Alma. The sheer proximity made Alma stiffen like a board. Sarah casually reached over, picked up the bottle of champagne I had ordered, and poured herself a generous glass in Alma's stunned silence. Sarah took a slow sip, looked directly at Alma's pale face, and smiled with terrifying sweetness. Thanks for taking him off my hands, sweetie, Sarah said, her voice completely smooth. I've been trying to find a legally airtight way to get rid of that leech for 3 years. Oh, by the way, the divorce papers were officially served to his office exactly 10 minutes ago. He's all yours. Alma stammered, her voice shaking violently. What? Who are you? What is this? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, completely enjoying the moment. Alma, meet Sarah, I said. Marcus's wife. Well, soon-to-be ex-wife. Alma tried to claw back her composure, looking back and forth between us. So what? She hissed, trying to project a confidence she clearly didn't feel anymore. Marcus loves me. He has his own money. We don't need you, and we don't need his marriage. He's rich. Sarah actually laughed out loud, a rich, genuine sound that echoed slightly in the quiet restaurant. Oh, honey, Sarah said, shaking her head with genuine pity. Marcus doesn't have a dime. That penthouse he took you to? It's leased under my family's real estate holding company. The Maserati he drives? Registered to my father's corporate fleet. The expensive watches and custom suits? Paid for entirely by my family's private trust. Sarah leaned in closer to Alma, her smile vanishing into ice. Marcus signed an incredibly strict, ironclad prenuptial agreement when he married into my family. Infidelity means he gets an absolute grand total of $0. By providing me with the mountain of hotel receipts, text logs, and private investigator photos that your husband kindly gathered, you just triggered the infidelity clause. Marcus is being walked out of his life with nothing but the clothes on his back. Alma was visibly trembling now, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the edge of the table. No, that's not true. He's a VP. He makes his own money. That's when Sarah dropped the hammer. He was a VP, Sarah corrected her. Because Marcus was using company credit cards and corporate funds to pay for your secret weekend getaways to Cabo and Miami, my family, who happens to own the majority stake in the firm, has already initiated an immediate internal forensic audit. Marcus isn't just being fired today. He's likely facing corporate fraud charges. And as for you, you're being terminated for extreme HR violations and complicity, effective immediately. Your corporate email has already been wiped. The realization hit Alma like a physical blow. In the span of 5 minutes, her entire grand plan had disintegrated. Her affluent lover was actually broke and unemployed, and her own lucrative career was completely dead. Panicking, Alma turned her fury back to me, her eyes wild. She tried to puff out her chest, slamming her hand on the table. "You think you won?" she screamed, her voice rising to a pitch that made neighboring tables stop talking and turn around. "I am still your wife. We don't have a prenup. I am going to hire the meanest lawyer in this city, and I am going to take half of this house, half of your savings, and half of your grandfather's inheritance. You're going to support me for the rest of my life." I didn't get angry. I just reached down to the briefcase resting against my chair, unzipped it, and pulled out a thick, legal manila folder. I slid it casually across the table, resting it right next to her untouched dinner. "Open it," I said softly. With trembling fingers, Alma opened the folder. Inside was a certified copy of a legal separation of assets and a postnuptial agreement, fully stamped and filed with the court months ago. "Remember those mandatory corporate tax restructuring documents I asked you to sign back in January?" I asked her, my smile wider than ever. "The ones you didn't even bother to read because you were too busy texting Marcus under the dinner table? You blindly signed a legally binding separation of property. Everything I earn, everything in my personal accounts, and my grandfather's trust are legally entirely separate from you. Furthermore, there's a full itemized list of every single dollar of marital funds you spent on Marcus, the flights, the expensive dinners, the gifts. In our state, hiding marital assets for an affair means you have to pay that money back to the betrayed spouse. You legally owe me close to $40,000. The absolute gravity of the trap crashed down on Alma all at once. She had no husband, no wealthy lover, no job, no money, and absolutely zero legal leverage. The shock instantly morphed into a horrific, unhinged public meltdown. Alma stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. She grabbed her wine glass and threw it across the table, shattering it against my water glass. "You ruined my life," she shrieked, her face turning a violent shade of red. "You premeditated this. You're a monster. Both of you are disgusting. I hate you. I'll burn this whole place down before I let you do this to me." She was shouting at the top of her lungs, crying hysterically, completely losing her mind in the middle of one of the most quiet, elite restaurants in the city. But I had anticipated the fireworks. Before Alma could grab a fork to throw, the restaurant manager, whom I had met with earlier that afternoon and given a very generous $500 tip for his cooperation, stepped forward from the shadows. He wasn't alone. 2 large, burly private security guards stood right behind him. The manager looked at Alma with an expression of profound disgust. "Ma'am," he said, his voice echoing loudly in the now dead-silent dining room. "You are causing a severe disturbance and destroying restaurant property. You need to leave the premises immediately, or we will have the police arrest you for disorderly conduct." Alma looked around the room, completely humiliated. Dozens of wealthy patrons were staring at her with utter disdain, some even whispering and pointing. The security guard stepped forward, firmly taking her by the arms. She didn't even have the strength to fight them. Sobbing hysterically, her makeup smeared across her face, Alma was publicly escorted out of the restaurant, crying out my name as the doors swung shut behind her. The heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung shut, cutting off the faint, distant sound of Alma's hysterical sobbing. For a brief second, the entire dining room remained dead silent. Then, the ambient murmur of quiet conversations and clinking silverware slowly resumed. With Alma officially cleared from the board, the tense energy at the table evaporated. Sarah and I just looked at each other for a moment, and then we both burst into a quiet, triumphant laugh. The plan had executed with absolute, flawless precision. We spent the next hour casually enjoying the rest of the expensive dinner, chatting about how surreal the last few months of planning had been, and toast ing to our mutual freedom. When the waiter finally brought the exorbitant bill, I smiled warmly and handed him Alma's personal credit card. I had explicitly authorized her card for this specific reservation before completely freezing and locking our joint marital accounts earlier that afternoon. Consider it her final, non-refundable contribution to the marriage. The next 48 hours were absolute, unhinged chaos. The moment Amma got back to whatever cheap motel room she dragged herself to, my phone began blowing up uncontrollably. It was like watching someone go through the 5 stages of grief on absolute fast-forward via text message. At first, the texts were filled with pure, unadulterated venom. She called me a psycho, a manipulator, and swore she would find a way to ruin me. But by midnight, the tone shifted drastically into desperate, pathetic begging. She sent massive walls of text, sobbing emojis, and missed calls, claiming that Marcus had manipulated her, that she was in a dark place, and that she had always loved me. She begged me to give her another chance, promising to go to counseling and do whatever it took to fix us. Even Marcus tried to call me from an unknown number, literally crying over the voicemail, begging me to tell Sarah to drop the corporate fraud investigation because his entire life was ruined. I didn't reply to a single word. I simply downloaded the text logs for my attorney, blocked both of their numbers, and finally got the best night of sleep I'd had in 2 years. Naturally, Amma didn't go down without trying to spin the narrative. The very next day, I started getting confused, angry texts from mutual friends and her extended family. Amma had run straight to them, crying that I had suddenly lost my mind, turned abusive, and thrown her out onto the street in the middle of our anniversary dinner for absolutely no reason. But I was entirely prepared for her smear campaign. I had already created a secure Google Drive folder. Inside was the absolute holy grail of evidence. The private investigator's high-definition photos, itemized hotel receipts, copies of her explicit iPad messages, and an audio recording of her smugly bragging about her 2-year affair right before I dropped the trap. I simply dropped the link into a group chat containing her parents, her siblings, and our entire close circle of friends, with a short message. I'll let the evidence speak for itself. The backlash was instant and brutal. Her parents were so profoundly mortified by her behavior and financial deceit that they called me directly to apologize, completely disowning her actions and refusing to give her a single dime or a place to stay. Our mutual friends immediately cut her off. Her web of lies had completely collapsed. Fast forward a few months, and the legal victory was absolute. Because of the overwhelming, ironclad evidence of financial dissipation, specifically her using marital assets to fund Marcus's lifestyle, the divorce moved through the court system at lightning speed. Her lawyer realized almost immediately that they had zero ground to stand on. The judge ruled heavily in my favor. I kept the custom-built house, 100% of my retirement, my grandfather's inheritance, and most importantly, my absolute peace of mind. Amma didn't get a single penny of alimony. In fact, after the legal offsets, she left the marriage completely broke. If you're wondering where the villains are now, reality hit them incredibly hard. Marcus is entirely ruined. Sarah's family followed through with the forensic audit, stripped him of everything in the divorce, and blacklisted him from the entire marketing industry. Last I heard, he's living in a cramped, depressing studio apartment and working an entry-level retail job just to pay his legal fees. Amma didn't fare any better. With no career, no references, and no money, she had to pack up her things and move back in with a distant relative in a small town. She's currently working a low-paying, entry-level administrative job she absolutely hates, completely humbled, miserable, and forced to face the consequences of her own choices every single day. As for me, I've spent the last few months focusing entirely on myself. I took a month-long sabbatical to travel through Europe, finally seeing the places I actually wanted to visit without her complaining. I've been hitting the gym consistently, eating right, and investing heavily in my own mental health. My friends tell me I look healthier, younger, and happier than I have in years. It took a lot of pain to get here, but looking back from the other side, I can confidently say that living well is the absolute best revenge.